to South Beach and join the Miami Heat.
In the first of a three-part Outside the Line series today, a scientifically conducted poll examines whether the media firestorm directed at James is mirrored among fans. Also today,
here comes the rush. He throws the football incomplete as Deshaun Jackson went off and is going to get hit and hit in the helmet.
With on-field injuries and split-second decisions, the football story of the moment. How large a cultural shift is needed for coaches to also make the correct sideline calls? Today, Outside the Lines, decisions in the moment. And LeBron by the numbers in a poll of fans.
And now, reporting for Outside the Lines, Bob Lee.
Earlier this week, LeBron James shared some of the offensive and racist tweets that had been directed at him on Twitter.com. To give others, he said, an understanding of some of the vitriol directed at him over his decision to depart Cleveland and the manner in which he did. Yesterday, James said he knows that sports are emotional. He can understand some of the anger and the sense of betrayal felt by even rational fans. Today, in the first installment of an Outside the Line series, how do fans feel about the signature player in the National Basketball Association?
By the time LeBron James' free agent decision had become a welcomed reality in Miami, he was facing a national barrage of harsh editorial criticism. His departure from Cleveland marked him as a, quote, coward. Heading to Miami made him a carpetbagger. The Spectacle labeled him an egotist and a self-absorbed child. Michael Jordan said he would never have collaborated as James did with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. Charles Barkley was more blunt.
He'll never be Jordan. This clearly takes him out of the conversation. There would have been something honorable about staying in Cleveland trying to win it as the man.
In a scientifically conducted ESPN Seton Hall sports poll of more than 900 people, James' popularity did trail behind Kobe Bryant's and even the current-day Tiger Woods. But despite the emotional and public pushback in the media over his orchestrated free agent decision, James is viewed favorably by a roughly 2-to-1 margin. In fact, the sports fans polled by that same 2-to-1 margin endorsed his move to Miami, and an absolute majority of fans said James' decision to leave Cleveland had no impact on how they viewed him.
This fall, I'm going to take my talents to South Beach and join the Miami Heat.
But James' strategy announcing his free agent decision on a one-hour ESPN program drew harsh criticism. Nearly 85% of fans who viewed James unfavorably said their opinions were impacted by this show.
Did you have a chance to talk to Dan Gilbert at all in the last few days and even since making the decision?
No, I haven't.
Even more fans with a negative opinion of James, 89%, say his not informing the Cavaliers or owner Dan Gilbert ahead of that program had an impact on their opinions. Age is a factor in the perception of James. Almost half of all younger fans polled view him favorably, a number that slips to just over a third for middle-aged fans and just over a quarter for the oldest fans. And then there is the issue of race and the criticism leveled at James.
Do you think there's a role that race plays in this?
I think so at times. It's always, a race factor.
The way race really plays a role in the perception of LeBron, I think, is more seen in Black America, where there's this protectionism, this reaction by a large portion of the Black community who sees LeBron taking widespread criticism to say, hold on, wait a second, do we really need to dislike this guy this much? That's why you haven't seen a shift in negative opinion for LeBron within the Black community.
Our polling supports that observation. 32% of white fans view James favorably, but among Black fans, his support is double that. And as to whether James' handling of the entire free agent process and move to Miami made fans view him less favorably, white fans hold that opinion by a 2-to-1 margin over Black fans.
So with that as a prelude, let's now consider the reaction scientifically arrived at via that polling 3 months after the decision and 4 days before LeBron James makes his regular season Miami Heat debut. We say good day to Chris Broussard, ESPN NBA insider. You saw Vincent Thomas of Slam Magazine in our report on the poll results, and Bill Livingston, for years columnist for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. It's good to have you all here. Chris, what surprises you, if anything, about some of those numbers?
Well, you know, when you look at the media firestorm, you would think that the whole nation was against LeBron James because, as it said in the piece, the media and so many of the great players of the past, Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, Larry Bird, they've come out and been somewhat critical of what LeBron did. But you saw by the poll that many fans have no problem with what he did in terms of going to Miami. And me being on the streets and people coming up to me, whether it was in New York or in other cities, I found that a lot of people, you know, didn't have a bad view of what LeBron did. And that surprised me initially because, again, in the media, the portrayal was so negative.
Well, why do you think that was, Chris? Why so much daylight between the Fifth Estate and exactly what was going on with guys on the street?
I don't really know. You know, I don't know how to answer that. I guess, you know, obviously now a lot of media people give opinions, and a lot of them had a disfavorable opinion of what LeBron did. Not all of them, but many of them did. I don't know if it was comparing him to Michael Jordan or what, but clearly they differ a little bit from the average fan.
Bill, I guess there's a special subset of Cleveland media. So let me ask you, just to, not necessarily as a media member, but as somebody there in Northeast Ohio, where's the anger meter right now?
It's still very high. And what your poll unfortunately left out is the way he played before he entered his free agency phase, because he quit on the court against the Boston Celtics in Game 5, and they didn't play out the math and foul and hope they missed free throws in Game 6 with his blessings. So with that as the prelude, I would have thought, and I think many of the fans here felt that he had some things to redeem, but obviously he didn't because it was all about him. He is the second most unpopular sports figure in Cleveland history, and he will always be behind Art Modell, who's just unreachable because he moved the most beloved team in town.
All right, so certainly there's that residual anger. We'll talk more about exactly what the emotional landscape is in Cleveland. Let me ask Vincent, whom we heard from during our report. You made those observations, which we excerpted several weeks ago, and we talked about the issue of race. And there's race, and there's age, and there's the daylight between the media and those that we polled. So which of those findings stick out in your mind?
You know, I always love the way the generation gap exposes itself when it comes to public opinion. And although I'm sure there are plenty of young people in Cleveland who dislike LeBron greatly, and some young people who like to ride bandwagons, or who for whatever reason have a strong dislike for LeBron, typically the younger generation just doesn't get into moral outrage. They don't do moral outrage. However, you asked why there was like this daylight between the public and the media. Well, most media members are of an older age, and you know, I think it was a story that had some legs, and I think that the way LeBron went about his decision put a lot of media members in positions maybe that they didn't care for, and I think that's why you've seen this media crush of negativity on LeBron. And of course, you know, we're going to take the negative sentiments wherever we can find to buttress our opinion.
Chris, he called it, LeBron did Hater Tuesday several days ago. Earlier this week, he retweeted or released a lot of they were vile and offensive. Some, and he's got 900,000 followers, and whether these were just open messages or direct messages to him on Twitter, there were some rugged things in there. What was the thinking, and what was your reaction when you saw him put this out there in the public forum?
Well, I think he was trying to show what he's dealing with. Because remember, a few weeks ago when he answered a question about race, and he said he thinks there was an element of race involved. There is in everything he said. He caught a lot of heat for that and a lot of flack for that. And so I think he was showing, hey, I wasn't just making this up. There was a reason I made that statement. And I can say this. I was in Cleveland last week to do the third part of this series that you mentioned on LeBron in Cleveland. And when we talked to fans about LeBron, you know, what they felt about LeBron, how they feel about him, and how he left, we heard some racial comments. You know, we heard not most people, but there were a few young men who made racist statements about LeBron James. So clearly he was right in that regard. I mean, he didn't say race was the dominant factor, but he said it probably played a role, and it clearly has.
There's a segment after. Go ahead, Vince.
And Bob, I also think that LeBron is using this as motivation. There's a force that he plays with this season that goes above and beyond the force that he was in previous years, and for the past couple of years, he's been the force of nature in the NBA. LeBron has come into this season more motivated than maybe any NBA athlete in recent memory, and when he reads those negative tweets, I think it adds to his motivation, and that's why you see him sort of harping on that.
Bill?
I think that he's taking marginalized people and a very small minority of fans and trying to present this not as an aberration but as the norm. I do not believe the vast majority of Cleveland fans there is a racial component to this. Cleveland has a very proud history of progressivism in sports, with the first black manager, the first black coach and general manager tandem, with Larry Doby, the second baseball player. It's a city that really doesn't care what color you are as long as you can produce. They're so starved for a winner. This was a local guy who stabbed them in the back. If he had been white, the backlash would have probably been close. I'm not saying there's no racial component. I'm not Pollyanna. But if he had been white, the backlash would have been close to as big.
Well, since Chris, you were visiting, let me just ask Bill. The question will be asked in abstract. I'll ask it to you directly. Cleveland, isn't it time to move on?
Well, not when the team's been bombed out like this. I mean, basketball's not even on the back. Basketball was always the third sport, really, when the Indians were good. Now it's not even on the back burner. It's not on the stove anymore in Cleveland. People know that this franchise did everything possible to accommodate him. Overlooked things, made the bet. You know, these deals didn't work out. Jameson didn't work out, and Shaq didn't work out because of the injury. At the time, everyone thought those were the best things they could do to buttress LeBron James.
Vince?
Yeah, well, I agree, but I do think that LeBron, I was in the locker room yesterday when LeBron was speaking about how he understands the emotion that is involved between fans and sports. And he said after a while, you have to get over it. He didn't say it in a dismissive way, but I would like to say that we keep on referring to these tweets as racist tweets. And one of the tweets had a racist overtone, but some of the other ones were merely just spewing venom. Not racist venom, but venom. So LeBron has not been the one that has been driving the racial agenda when it comes to this discussion. And I just wanted to mention that.
Chris, how motivated quickly does LeBron look in this preseason with all of this behind him now?
Incredibly motivated. He's more serious than ever. But let's be honest, we're really not going to know until the playoffs. I mean, LeBron has always played terrifically, and the only thing that's really going to get him over this hump is winning a championship. So he looks great. He looks motivated. But unless it ends in the Miami Heat winning the title, he's going to still receive a lot of criticism, and probably more than ever, because in Cleveland, he always had the built-in excuse of people saying he didn't have enough talent around him. Now you've got two all-stars. People aren't going to be so easy to let him get past it if he doesn't win it this year.
Chris Broussard, thanks for the de facto promo. We'll look for your part 3 in the series early next week. Vince Thomas, always a pleasure. And Bill Livingston, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Now, the topic of football and head injuries. The NFL's heightened enforcement on helmet-to-helmet hits, well, it's captivated the football nation with pushback from players, some of them saying the instantaneous decision that players must make cannot be deconstructed